Hey guys, and welcome to the Working Money channel. So as you guys know, there was an Anthony Pompliano and a Bradley Garlinghouse interview last week on Friday. Anthony Pompliano interviewed Brad Garlinghouse on his Off the Chain podcast, and guys, it's an hour and a half long. Today, I thought it would be appropriate to give you guys a detailed synopsis because I know some of you guys don't have time to watch the hour and a half, or rather listen to an hour and a half long podcast. I'm essentially going to synopsize the interview for you guys. A lot of the stuff we have heard before, but there are some juicy tidbits in this interview that I thought you guys should hear. So essentially, they started off the podcast with Anthony Pompliano saying that, Brad didn't receive any payment for being on his show. He was there completely of his own volition, of his own free will, and, he didn't go in knowing what any of the questions were going to be. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Brad talks about his history with Yahoo. We've heard this before. A lot of the stuff we had heard in the Recode Decode interview he had done last few months ago. Anyways, he discusses his peanut butter manifesto and the problem with Yahoo spreading itself too thin. Essentially, if you want to be all things to all people, you'll never be anything of importance to anybody, is essentially what he stated to Anthony Pompliano. I'm paraphrasing, by the way. Brad said he heard about Bitcoin at the Dialogue Conference, and this is a conference put on by Peter Thiel and others, and he heard about Bitcoin in 2012. So what he did was he bought Bitcoin in 2012, and of course, as we know, Brad has famously said that he is long Bitcoin. So that's the year he bought it in, folks, 2012. But what he thought was, if you took a broader strategy with this kind of thing, you could reach broader adoption and reach more people more quickly. He got recruited by Ripple, and Chris Larson wanted, essentially he was explaining Chris Larson wanted somebody from outside the system, and Brad thought to himself, if this thing works, it could be something really impactful in a lot of ways. Guys, by the way, I'm just synopsizing the notes. Of course, this was an hour and a half interview. Some of this stuff you already may know, but I want to be as detailed and thorough for you guys as possible. So he talks about blockchain technology, and at a lot of these conferences, so many geeks are nerding out about the tech, and he finds that, a lot of the important reasons Ripple's doing what they're doing can get lost in this echo chamber of people getting so excited about the technology, that they lose sight of how they will fix problems for the customer. Ripple decided to pick payments and liquidity as a solution. So their whole strategy was to go narrow and deep as opposed to shallow and wide. Something that he took a page out of his own peanut butter manifesto. And it served them very well. Going wide and thin like other companies, there might be some initial progress, but ultimately no traction. So yes, he says Ripple is indeed thriving. Anthony Pompliano asks him about the three products, and guys, I don't want to go over Xcurrent, XRP, and XVIA with you. We already know what those are all about, so I'm not going to waste time doing that. But he did state that XRapid is now being rebranded ODL for on-demand liquidity. Brad states that MoneyGram has hundreds of millions of dollars of negative working capital, so he's explaining to Anthony Pompliano about the Nostro Vostro accounts and the pre-funded accounts and how this works. And he actually used MoneyGram as an example. They have hundreds of millions of dollars of negative working capital right now because of pre-funded accounts. And by using Ripple technology, over time, companies like MoneyGram's enterprise value will indeed increase. It's a very big deal for how global liquidity is managed because it will essentially make the entire world economy more efficient. And so if you can source on-demand liquidity, of course, the efficiency globally just becomes better because, instead of people waiting several days to get their transfers, everything is happening instantly, and it's a problem that will be solved for not only that one company, but for the rest of the world. Then they get into some of the interesting points. Brad Garlinghouse discusses XRP, as he has a million times before, and how some of the founders were involved in the XRP ledger, in the creation of XRP. So there's naysayers, and of course we know Anthony Pompliano is a Bitcoin guy, and he's part of that Bitcoin community. And so he wanted to clear the air, he wanted to set the record straight, he kind of wanted to know the skivvy from the horse's mouth, Bradley Garlinghouse himself. So Brad explains that it was created before Ripple was founded, and the engineers essentially set out to build a better Bitcoin 2.0 as he puts, because they realized Bitcoin could not scale. And Brad picks no bones and says this, he states this flat out in front of Anthony Pompliano. So as I mentioned before, Brad says that he is long Bitcoin, but he does make this point very, very clear. Bitcoin will not solve a global payments problem. And he says that XRP, for all intents and purposes, is 1,000 times faster and 1,000 times cheaper per transaction than Bitcoin. Yes, guys, he said it. Bitcoin will not solve a global payments problem. So Anthony Pompliano reacts to this. He suggests Bitcoiners say there's a trade-off between speed and security, to which Brad says, I have not seen that. Brad says that the ledger has existed since 2012 and there have never been transactions unwound, hacked, hijacked, so on and so forth. So he does not believe that this statement is true. Can you believe this guy's Bitcoiner saying that there's a trade-off between speed and security, making excuses for their dated technology and their slow cryptocurrency? So why not use Bitcoin rather than XRP? They talk about Ripple products, and this came up. Well, Brad gives an example of other markets around the world where their currency is illiquid, and he uses an example, I believe, of Zimbabwe in the interview. But he says that maybe some of these countries may have liquidity in Ethereum or Bitcoin, for example, in which case a correspondent bank using Ripple Tech could use XRP to source Ethereum or to source Bitcoin instead. And then Anthony Pompliano, while Brad was explaining this, but Anthony Pompliano finally realized, though, he says, but Ripple will use XRP as their default first, and then Brad confirms, yes, this will happen first because it's obviously the most efficient way to transfer those funds. Brad Garlinghouse also made another point, and he says that Ripple is essentially the only company, the only crypto company using blockchain at scale right now, using cryptocurrency and blockchain at scale right now. Period. He says there are a lot of other projects in the space, but they are indeed the biggest. And then he also wants to see other projects succeed, not just XRP related projects, but all projects in the crypto space that have something good behind them, because it will essentially just help the rest of the ecosystem. And this is a point that I'm going to make. It does have to do, it goes back to regulations, right? The more and more we see positive companies doing something good with cryptocurrency in the space, the SEC will take note, and eventually they'll be pushed to make a decision sooner. Cryptocurrency regulations will become clearer across the board, and this will be good for everybody. Brad talks about the 200 plus contracts that Ripple has signed with banks, and he says that when they were at Sibos just a few weeks ago, he said a potential client went up to them and said, it's not a question of if we will be working with Ripple, it's a question of when we will be working with Ripple. And the reason for that is because he says 26 of their correspondent banks were already working with Ripple. So he understands this concept of having a network, and since 26 of their clients were already on it, they'd eventually be going to Ripple as well. He says Ripple is seeing the network growing, and it's getting better for each subsequent client that joins the network because, of course, the more clients there are on the network, the better it is. And he gives a quick example of the telephone. The first person that got a telephone, it would suck for him because who's he going to call? He's the one person with a telephone. But of course, the more people that get telephones, the better it is, the more people you can call. And the same is true with the Ripple network. He says the number of transactions have been doubling quarter over quarter over quarter for at least 8 quarters. And they're in the many thousands of transactions. He also hinted that there is a chance that they will hit millions of transactions for the year. Brad says that they're gradually increasing liquidity in certain corridors, and obviously the more popular corridors are going to grow stronger first. He also hits the point home that the long-term value of any digital asset will derive from the utility it delivers. And guys, we've heard this many times before. When Brad is asked about the price of XRP, he always says this instead of putting a price on XRP. The long-term value of any digital asset will derive from the utility it delivers. The utility today is mostly speculation, in Brad Garlinghouse's words. And he says to some degree, liquidity begets liquidity. He talks about market makers and how, if there's an XRP market, he sees market makers participating in this cycle, and they will generate their own value from their participation. He talks about their relationship with banks and, how it can be a little tricky, right? With something new like cryptocurrency and people's perception of cryptocurrency, right? It's hard to onboard banks, and this is partially why they started with Xcurrent, that product that didn't use cryptocurrency. It was a strategy to gain these banks' trust so that, once the cryptocurrency regulations came to pass, they would feel way more comfortable moving from Xcurrent to Xrapid, and that Ripple wouldn't have to face that uphill battle at that time. So it was kind kind of like a little bit of candy, giving them a little bit of candy to get them to do what you want to do. Brad says it opened the door for them to discuss sourcing liquidity using XRP. And guys, that's essentially good for the cryptocurrency community as a whole. Pompliano sourced some questions from Twitter, and of course, there are a lot of detractors and a lot of proponents of XRP, and some people in the XRP army were concerned about the health of XRP and of Ripple dumping, right? There's this question of Ripple dumping XRP and what that's going to do to the price. Brad reiterates again, he says, they are, meaning Ripple, they are the most interested party in the health of XRP. They own a lot of it, but there are many other companies that are working in the ecosystem and building on the ledger, and that they've tried to be as transparent as possible, which many cryptocurrencies just aren't doing. They think it's best to lead by example, so they want to be clear and honest with everybody involved. Pompliano asks about depressing the price of XRP with Ripple's distribution. And so Brad goes on about why Ripple locks XRP in escrow and that they have 55 contracts, unlocked one time a month for 55 months, etc. That's approximately 4.5 years. I know you guys know a lot of this stuff already. And the fact that Ripple cannot violate the escrow as much as you guys think that Ripple can just do what they want with all the XRP they have, they cannot do that. He did say that over-the-counter sales have essentially slowed down, but when they were doing over-the-counter sales, Ripple was selling to companies essentially who wanted to get on board with the Ripple system, and also crypto speculators. And then that's when my head just spun for a few seconds. Wait. You are selling over-the-counter to crypto speculators as well? Meaning there are people who were approaching Ripple. They had enough money to go to Ripple and say, can you sell me X amount of million of XRP for this price over the counter? And yes, Ripple was selling to speculators. This is how valuable this asset is. That was the first inclination in this interview here that got me really, really excited to hear. Because if Ripple was selling, they aren't anymore, if they were selling over the counter to crypto speculators, that to me is a big deal. Brad went on to say that only, about 20 to 30 times have people come to them directly to buy XRP over the counter, so it isn't actually a large amount. They've essentially stopped over the counter sales because they just figure, these people can just buy XRP over the counter from another exchange, or they can just buy it directly from the exchange. He also stated that 99.9% of XRP trading has nothing to do with Ripple whatsoever, and it's just the market doing its thing. And so what is Ripple doing with all the money that they have garnered from XRP sales? Well, they said they used the money to invest in other companies. Obviously, there was the MoneyGram deal and other companies as well. He talks a little bit about market capitalization and how, Ripple has been criticized for the way that, their founders are using their XRP. And he mentions the Jed McCaleb story and how they had to go to court for that. But essentially, he states something that none of us have really brought up, and the fact that, if anybody had bought Bitcoin or Ethereum in year one and accumulated so much Bitcoin or Ethereum at that time, and then the price skyrocketed, there are no restrictions for those people selling as much or as little as they want. So why would anybody even think that it's any different for XRP? At least with Ripple, they're putting restrictions on how much XRP can be sold, like in the case of Jed McCaleb, so as not to screw around the market, essentially. One thing I thought was really, really interesting, and this was another aha moment for me in this article, was when Brad talked about Ripple's future. And so he talks about when he was in business school, Jeff Bezos from Amazon coming into his business school when he was just starting, and that was when Amazon was doing just books, okay? And Brad says, Ripple is to cross-border payments as Amazon is to books. Amazon launched one vertical, and had they not been successful, they wouldn't have been able to do other things like DVDs, merchandise, so on and so forth. So Ripple is, what they're doing right now is they are launching their one vertical, the cross-border payments vertical, and he says it's a massive market, there's a clear pain point, etc. But he says they have to be successful in that one vertical before they can really expand and make waves with the XRP ecosystem. He says they are going to enter other verticals for sure, expand the same way Amazon expand, and that by making a lot of investments, they will succeed in doing so. And so he explains to Anthony Pompliano that one of the bigger investments that Amazon made way back when in the dot-com boom was Pets.com, and Pets.com fell flat. They went bankrupt, okay? And Amazon was one of their bigger investors. Now, Amazon is still thriving, obviously, but that's part of his point. It's kind of like throwing darts at a dartboard approach. If Ripple has the money, so they are going to invest in companies companies with relation to cryptocurrency. Some are going to succeed, some are not, but that is how they're going to grow. That is how they're going to be huge, and that is how the XRP ecosystem will grow as well. Then there was this whole talk about, is XRP a currency? Is it a security? Is it a utility token? And he always has maintained that he thinks of XRP, guys, as a currency. And when they were talking about over-the-counter sales, they were saying, well, how much discount do you give, these potential clients for OTC sales? And Brad didn't really know the number, but he says, I don't know, maybe 5%. He says, why would you sell somebody $1 for half a dollar or for 50 cents? So Brad does value XRP. He does see it as a currency, which I think is very important. And when asked about the XRP army, he says he thinks the XRP army is a reaction to the FUD. He thinks the community has been catalyzed to correct that. And all Brad wants out there is for everybody to start with the same basis of facts. He says there's a lot of misunderstandings about Ripple and the XRP ledger, and that's why he's out doing his thing, doing interviews like with Anthony Pompliano, and he says the XRP army helps with that. Another aha moment, guys, that I got from this interview was this, when he was talking about payments to his employees, okay, to Ripple employees. Brad says there are people at Ripple who choose to get paid in XRP. Yes. So guys, it is confirmed. People at Ripple are choosing to opt in. They have a program where they opt in and they can get paid in XRP. And there are quite a few, from my understanding, of people who are deciding to get paid partially in XRP as a bonus. But nobody is being paid 100% in XRP, and there is a limit to the amount that they can opt into. But guys, that's a good sign because they are doing this as an incentive. We heard reports of this, and companies give incentives like this, obviously in the hopes that that currency, as Brad puts XRP as a currency, will grow in value down the road. And the utility that is derived from any said cryptocurrency is going to dictate the price that it commands in the future. So I thought that was kind of interesting. He says Ripple was funded essentially through venture capital money and not the sale of XRP. And he says regulations are not so black and white and that the SEC has a very difficult job because of what they have to do. Ripple works with regulators around the world. And he says, the UK and Japan are already kind of on board, and the SEC is trying their best to clear this up. Then at the end of the interview, Anthony Pompliano kind of, smugly gives his two potential reality situations of where cryptocurrency could go in the future. And I say smug because he's like, well, he's trying to be diplomatic, you can tell. But at a point, he says, he could see two potential realities. A future where Ripple and XRP reign supreme, essentially, working with banks, going about the status quo, just kind of building on the infrastructure that we have right now and making it more efficient. And then he says there's another reality where Bitcoin will reign supreme, where banks will crash, and governments around the world will essentially lose power, and companies, fiat will go to zero, and everybody around the world will use Bitcoin. And I found it really funny. Brad squashes that point right away. He says that he stands by a statement that he loves to explain to his employees: the tyranny of the or versus the power of the and why does it have to be one or the other? There is not going to be a winner-take-all in our world, and that there will be many winners. He thinks that maybe in some facets of the world, Bitcoin could be a great use to, transfer money maybe in some countries like Zimbabwe or Venezuela when their fiat does go to zero. But he thinks that ultimately, governments and the current structures that we have in most of the world work very well. And that's what he asks himself. Is Ripple solving a real world problem? Yes, they are. And that's why he thinks they're going to be successful. Anyways, guys, that's the Anthony Pompliano interview with Brad Garlinghouse. Anyways, I want to hear what you guys think about this. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like the video if you like the content I'm providing. I always love hearing your comments. See you in the next one, guys.